Well, May the 4th has come and gone, and Star Wars Revenge of the Sith has been playing in theaters in honor of the film's 20th anniversary. I remember when we all started hating on the prequel movies, treating them like they were the worst films ever made, and how they somehow ruined the entire franchise. Yeah, that didn't age too well. We had no idea how good we had it back then. Funny thing is, despite it being quote unquote common knowledge that the prequel movies were bad, Revenge of the Sith just exploded in the box office recently. It's doing better than most of the new releases that just came out, apart from things like the Minecraft movie and Sinners. In fact, I have a confession to make. I enjoyed the Minecraft movie. Yeah, that's right, I actually liked it. Part of that was because the entire film didn't take itself too seriously. The Minecraft movie knows what it is, a campy flick for kids, and it leans into it. And you know what? It does that really well. But the biggest reason I enjoyed this movie was because I watched it with my nieces, who are 7 and 6 years old. The best part of the film was their happy faces. I would say that whether you enjoy the Minecraft movie is going to depend on if you brought any little kids with you, hopefully ones you're related to and not children you snatched off the street, and how well behaved the rest of the audience in the theater is. I got lucky. Most of the people in the theater where I saw it were pretty tame when the chicken jockey showed up. And for the first time in as long as I can remember, I actually had fun at the movie theater. I think that somewhere along the way, that's what we forgot about with Star Wars. I blame Red Letter Media and the Plinkett reviews. They made it sound like hating the prequels was the intelligent opinion. And one of their complaints was that a kids' movie shouldn't have all the politics of the Senate. But if I think back to when I was a kid watching the prequels in the theaters, none of that mattered. Even when I was little, and The Phantom Menace first came out, I understood the gist of it. Adults were arguing and they weren't going to do anything about the fish-faced guys blockading Naboo. Every kid who went to a public school understood how this worked. A bully is picking on other kids. One of the kids runs and tells an adult. The adults refuse to do anything, and so the kids have to deal with the bully themselves. That's not hard for children to understand. But it might be hard for someone who only watched these movies as an adult to appreciate that. Perhaps the biggest example of this is Jar Jar Binks. Jar Jar was primarily made to be a comic relief character to keep the kids occupied if the political stuff started to drag on. And yeah, there is that theory that Jar Jar is a Sith Lord, but putting that aside, he did his job as a kid appeal character very well. You don't hear children who watch Jar Jar in the theaters complain about him being in the prequels. You hear adults complain. And some of those might be adults who enjoyed him when they were kids, but the complaints about Jar Jar didn't start with the generation that grew up with the prequel movies. They started with an older generation that grew up with the original trilogy. A lot of these complaints start to sound more and more like old people whining about something that used to be made for them, but isn't anymore, because they got old. A bunch of middle-aged men complaining that the character meant to appeal to kids doesn't appeal to them. It's honestly kind of pathetic. I know it's a bittersweet thing, but one day, the entertainment media you grew up with is going to be too young for you. If they make another Avatar: The Last Airbender series, and it looks like they're planning to, it'll probably be aimed at children who are young now, rather than the adults who grew up with the original series. So it was with Star Wars. Most of the complaints about the prequel movies come down to two things. One, the dialogue between Padme and Anakin sounds dumb, and two, the plot is full of holes. The first complaint falls apart if you've ever had any kind of relationship where you're trying to flirt, and you're trying to be poetic, but you're not that good at it and words fail. People who are young, dumb, and in love talk like this all the time. I once overheard a guy try to talk sweet to his girlfriend and he said that he loved her like Kanye West loves Kanye West, which is kind of romantic, I guess. And as for the second complaint, that there are holes in the plot, I ask you, how well does the original trilogy hold up to that standard?
However, rather than transmitting the technical readouts of the Imperial battle station and keeping our hidden rebel base safe, Princess Leia insisted on coming back, knowing full well her ship was being tracked. In short, we have one chance to make this right, and it's all Princess Leia's fault.
Sir, we have reached the planet Yavin. The rebel base is on a moon orbiting on the other side of the planet. We will be in firing range within 30 minutes.
I say we're in range now. Fire.
The Death Star is in range. The Death Star is in range. The Death Star is in range.
So much for that idea.
Let's get something straight. There was nothing particularly original or new about A New Hope when it came out. The basic plot line is a farm boy raised by his aunt and uncle because his parents are dead or missing. He gets discovered by a wise old mentor who teaches him how to be a magic-wielding swordsman, and they go rescue a princess from a castle of the evil empire guarded by a dark knight with his own magic. If you went to a bookstore in the 70s, you could get a dozen different stories like this for $20. The main thing A New Hope changed was recycling the idea in space. Now, Empire is another story. I distinctly remember one of the guys from Red Letter Media calling Empire the linchpin holding this entire franchise together, and I can see why. It's the episode where the hero fails, the main girl's in love with a scoundrel, and they lose almost everything. That was unusual for the time, and the film managed to pull it off well. But Return of the Jedi is definitely the weakest of the original trilogy. Part of that is because in the first two movies, the stormtroopers were fairly intimidating, with armor designed to make them look like skeletons. We make fun of them for not being able to hit anything with their blasters, but in the first two movies there was a good reason for that. In A New Hope, the stormtroopers were given orders to let the heroes escape so the Empire could track them back to the rebel base. In The Empire Strikes Back, the stormtroopers only missed their shots against Luke, and Vader wanted them to avoid killing his son anyway, so they were probably ordered not to kill him. But in Return of the Jedi, these guys get completely demolished by a bunch of teddy bears with Stone Age tools, with zippers on their backs. That was the point when no one could take them seriously anymore. And this was when the suspension of disbelief started to crack. It became clear that named characters in this show weren't going to die unless they were supposed to. And while there was a degree of this already in other films and media, Return of the Jedi basically shoved it in your face and then told you to pretend not to notice. This is one of the reasons why some people think Rogue One actually improved the original trilogy, because it reintroduced death as a real threat in Star Wars for named characters. Now, if you grew up with the original trilogy, it makes sense that you would overlook these flaws, because when you watch these movies in the theater, you didn't really care about these flaws because in the moment, you just enjoyed the show. And that's okay. Because one thing that never changed about the original trilogy, or the prequels, is that they were meant to be entertaining. The number one goal of these movies was for you to enjoy them. Yes, Lucas did have a story he wanted to tell. Yes, there were themes he wanted to explore. But first and foremost, the movies were meant to be entertaining. And beyond that, they were centered around the themes and morals that we can actually learn from. Like how anger and hate can seem like a powerful ally, but will corrode your personality until you become something you don't recognize. The prequels focus heavily on the conflict between absolute dedication to living a life that doesn't concern itself with earthly matters, and how that actually makes the Jedi kind of suck at their jobs. By constantly letting go of things like romance, or by trying to distance themselves from politics, the Jedi are completely blindsided by what life is like for normal people. The Jedi knew that the dark side could never be destroyed, and while they were surprised when the Sith started to appear again, they were not unprepared for fighting them physically. But they never expected the Sith to play the game of politics, and they were so weak to it both on the level of the Senate and on the more personal level of Anakin because they refused to consider that the material lives matter. That people can't just force themselves to be happy with a bad situation, and will start looking for an alternative when the established religion of the galaxy is refusing to help them. Take the slavery issue, for example. On paper, slavery is illegal in the Galactic Republic, but that doesn't mean the Jedi are going to get off their cushy chairs on Coruscant and do something about it when people are bought and sold in the open market on Tatooine. Even after they bring Anakin to the Jedi Temple, they never go back for his mom, let alone deal with the actual problem of the slave trade. So it's not a surprise when many of the Outer Rim worlds join the Separatists, even if the Separatists are literally working for the forces of evil, because any change has the potential to bring some kind of progress. Meanwhile, every writer knows that you are not going to be able to get rid of all the plot holes in your story. Part of that comes from the fact that you are not a god, and while you are creating a whole world of fiction from your own head, you can't actually cover every tiny detail. And the other problem is that there are a lot of plot holes in real life. Most of the time, we call them history, where the behaviors of the people in question don't make a ton of sense from time to time, but we accept the narrative anyway for one reason or another. Sometimes the version of events turn out to be a big fat lie, and gets exposed as such, and people still choose to believe it. I know I've mentioned this before on this channel, but a lot of writers and audiences overlook just how dumb some people can be. There's actually an entire theory by a theologian named Dietrich Bonhoeffer about how stupid people are more dangerous than evil people. Part of it has to do with the fact that stupid people are more likely to resist rational arguments than evildoers, since a person motivated by greed can be persuaded with the right incentives, but a stupid person can't be reasoned with. At the same time, a greedy or selfish person isn't going to drop poison into the river the local communities drink from, because he drinks from the same water supply and doesn't want to poison himself. But a stupid person will do it because he doesn't think about how his actions will affect other people, including himself. And it's not like people in real life don't make some of the same stupid decisions that we see in the prequel trilogy. Now, this is going to sound like a completely unrelated tangent, but I'd like to take a moment to explain why it's so important that Han shot first. Trust me, this is relevant. Try to think back to the first time you saw A New Hope. You don't know who the characters are or how the movie ends, you just know what you've seen so far. Luke and Obi-Wan have just booked passage to Alderaan with Han and Chewie. We don't know what Han Solo normally does for a living, maybe he just carries passengers everywhere. But when Luke and Obi-Wan aren't around, a bounty hunter walks into the cantina and points a gun at Han. We learn that there's a bounty on his head, and that he's in debt to the mob, and that he primarily works as a smuggler. We don't know what kind. Maybe he smuggles guns, or drugs, or maybe people. And if he's desperate for cash, and the Empire wants those droids, how quickly is he going to sell our heroes out? Now Greedo's got his gun on the table, and so Han shooting him is clearly justifiable self-defense no matter what. But in the original scene, Han shoots Greedo under the table and kills him in cold blood, with a smile on his face. This is the man that our heroes just booked a flight with, and now there's a whole heaping ton of dramatic irony and tension, because we don't know how this is going to play out. What we do know is that Han just killed a guy like it was nothing, and our other heroes are none the wiser. Of course, if you've seen this movie so many times that you've memorized half the lines, then you might not notice this stuff anymore. But the first time you see it, this is a really suspense-filled scene. But in the edited version where Greedo shoots first, Han is killing him in the heat of the moment. Now he's not a cold-blooded killer, at least as far as we know. And while it's not in the same scene, people associate Jabba being edited into the movie with Greedo shooting first. The claim Han shot first is as much about how Jabba shouldn't have been edited into the film, not just about the part inside the cantina. And in Jabba's scene, we get confirmation that Han isn't in such deep water that paying off his debt will come before things like taking Luke and Obi-Wan where they want to go. All of the tension is let out of the movie like air in a balloon, and the whole thing from Greedo walking into the cantina to the end of Han's discussion with Jabba becomes a great big waste of the audience's time. You could cut these scenes out of the movie entirely, and you wouldn't lose anything of value. The reason these changes were made was to make Han look less morally ambiguous in case kids might be scared of him. Or worse, they might think Han is a role model, and that they can shoot someone under the table if they're pointing a gun in their face. Which, legally, they can. In other words, these changes were made to A New Hope in an effort to treat kids and the audience in general like idiots. Now you might be wondering, if the prequel movies are admittedly flawed, but still selling out in theaters as a re-release, how does it relate to the Disney trilogy? And if the original trilogy was flawed, but people still enjoyed them anyway, why do we all hate the Disney media so much? Is it really all down to Rey being a Mary Sue, or the woke politics? I have my doubts. I remember when The Force Awakens came out in theaters, and all my friends and family enjoyed the movie at the time, including me. Sure, the flaws were there. There were some people complaining about Rey being a Mary Sue, or that the film was mostly just a rehash of A New Hope, but we overlooked them at first because we wanted to give Disney Star Wars a chance. And then The Last Jedi came out, and we realized that the problems in the first movie weren't flaws at all. They were there by design. In the very beginning of the film, we're given a scene in which Poe Dameron and his X-Wing team have cleared the way for a Resistance bombing run, and Leia orders him to call off the bombing run because it's too risky. Now, the goal they were trying to go for in this scene was how Poe needed to be humbled, how he was a risk-taking flyboy who didn't follow orders and didn't respect the chain of command. But the problem is, anyone with a child's understanding of military tactics can see that Leia is the one in the wrong here. The risk to the bombers isn't any higher than it was at the time the Resistance was planning this attack. And now that the X-Wings have cleared the way, there's less risk than before. So why would they abort? You might not have noticed all of this at the time you saw it, but your brain did. See, at the end of the day, Leia had to agree to this bombing run at some point. And she only decides to try and call it off at the worst possible time, when the bombers are already halfway to their target, meaning they'd be sitting ducks if some TIE fighters came out and started picking them off while they were trying to flee. Also, why is she telling Poe to call it off? He's in charge of the X-Wings, not the bombers. Shouldn't there be a commander for the bombers she can talk to? When every second matters, why does this chain of command rely on Leia talking to Poe, who then has to talk to the bombers to call off the attack? What would Leia do if Poe's X-Wing got shot down, or he was unable to relay these orders to the bombers? Everything about this is wrong, to the point where it almost feels like Leia is setting Poe up as a fall guy in case things don't go according to plan. And a child can understand all of this. They understand when a parent makes a plan to go to the beach, something that's contingent on things like the weather, and then when it turns out to be bright and sunny and there's less risk than there was before, but the parent cancels their plans anyway because it's too risky. The kid knows at that point that something else is going on. And it gets even worse when Admiral Holdo takes command, and without going into too much detail, she breaks virtually every rule in the book regarding military structure. Like the part where she refuses to inform her inferior officers of her plans for no apparent reason other than a petty grudge against Dameron. You don't have to have gone through officer training to realize that this would lead to mutiny, especially when the Resistance is running for their lives and all hope appears to be lost. And then, we get the reveal that her plan of hiding on a nearby planet didn't require any information be kept top secret. She just let morale fall apart purely out of disdain for Poe. At no point in the film is she punished for this. She's presented by the movie as having been in the right to act like a petty, pretentious moron who's gambling with the lives of everyone in the Resistance for no good reason. The rest of the film follows a similar trend of showing the audience one thing and then telling us it's something else. The Last Jedi, and most of the rest of the Disney Star Wars media since then, are a tale told by an idiot who thinks he's smarter than the audience and treats you like you're stupid. Does anyone know any kids who saw this and enjoyed it? Because I don't. Lots of people have pointed out that the prequel movies were made by Lucas when he had a specific story to tell, whereas Disney made their movies purely to make money. But I'm not entirely sure that that's true. I think Disney made their movies because they did have a story to tell, or at least a narrative to push. And if you notice, the prequel movies were full of politics too. Lucas doesn't hide the fact that the rise of the Empire was intended to reflect how he felt about the Bush administration at the time. But the difference is, the prequel movies don't treat you like an idiot. They don't deliberately waste your time, and they don't show you one thing and try to tell you it's something else. And the most important thing, they put the concept of fun first and foremost, especially for children, and not just adults who act like children. And with that, it's time to talk about today's featured video game, Void War. Void War is basically a faster-than-light clone and a copyright-distinct version of Warhammer 40k. They don't even try to hide any of those things. Even some of the gear you can equip your crew with, like a Power Fist, is taken straight out of 40k. Not that that's a bad thing, mind you. Warhammer appears to be undergoing a cultural surge right now, due to a combination of its themes being exactly what people might need in the grimdark universe of real life in the 21st century, and a lot of streamers playing Space Marine are getting engrossed in the lore. Meanwhile, FTL is a fun game about flying a ship through space. Void War is a little bit simpler than that, but manages to fill the void with 40k references. If you're up to speed on the lore of Warhammer, you should be able to get through any knowledge checkpoints by just answering however a Mechanicus tech priest or an officer of the Astra Militarum would. Alright, that's all I've got for today. Check out my fantasy series over on Amazon, hit that like and subscribe button, and thank you all, and goodbye.